Magine, a courtroom packed with tension. A high-profile case is unfolding, and all eyes are on the judge, a man whose reputation precedes him. But just as the verdict is about to be delivered, something happens that no one could have expected. A young boy, no older than 10, stands up from the back row. His voice, though small, carries across the silent room. "Your Honor, I know what you did." The entire courtroom freezes. Lawyers exchange puzzled glances. The judge's face goes pale, and the murmurs start spreading like wildfire. Who is this boy, and what does he know? What happens next will shake the foundation of justice itself. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to the channel, like this video, and turn on notifications so you never miss an inspiring story like this. This is a tale of truth, courage, and the power of one voice against corruption. Get ready for an unforgettable journey. The grand courtroom of Harrison County was packed to the brim, a sea of tense faces waiting for the final verdict. The air was thick with anticipation. Reporters lined the back rows, their pens poised over notepads, cameras flashing at every movement near the judge's bench. This was one of the most controversial trials the state had seen in decades, and the final moments were about to unfold. Judge Martin Holloway, a stern-faced man in his early 60s, adjusted his glasses and cleared his throat. His reputation was ironclad, known for his strict rulings and unwavering demeanor. Yet, today, something about him seemed off. His fingers tapped anxiously on the wooden desk, and he stole glances toward the jury, as if waiting for an unseen signal. In the front row sat the defendant, a young black man named Terrence Malone. Accused of a crime he swore he did not commit, Terrence had spent the last 6 months fighting to clear his name. His lawyer, Sarah Whitmore, had presented a compelling case, evidence that pointed to inconsistencies in the prosecution's claims. Yet, deep down, she feared the worst. The court clerk stood, ready to hand the verdict envelope to the judge. The silence in the room was deafening. Just as Judge Holloway reached for it, a small voice cut through the heavy air. "Your Honor, I know what you did." Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Heads turned, eyes searching for the source of the voice. Near the back of the room, standing on shaky legs, was a boy no older than 10. His dark brown eyes burned with conviction, and though his hands trembled, he did not waver. Judge Holloway froze. His expression faltered for the briefest moment, barely perceptible, but enough for those paying close attention to catch. The courtroom was in chaos within seconds. The bailiff rushed toward the boy, but he stood his ground. "I know what you did," the boy repeated, his voice stronger this time. Sarah Whitmore rose from her seat, stepping forward. "Your Honor, this child has something to say," she said firmly, glancing at Terrence, who looked just as bewildered as the rest of the court. Judge Holloway's knuckles turned white as he gripped the edge of his desk. "This is highly irregular," he snapped. "Remove that child immediately." "No," the boy shouted, his small frame shaking with intensity. "You lied about Terrence. You knew he was innocent." The room erupted. People whispered among themselves, cameras flashing, recording every second. The bailiff hesitated, waiting for instruction. Judge Holloway's face flushed, his carefully composed mask cracking under the weight of the unexpected accusation. Sarah saw an opening. "Your Honor, if this child has information relevant to this case, we must hear him out." The judge hesitated, but before he could respond, the boy turned to Sarah. "You have to listen," he pleaded. I have proof." Terrence, who had been silent through the commotion, finally spoke. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice cautious yet curious. The boy swallowed hard. "My name is Elijah." and I know the truth about this trial." The courtroom buzzed with excitement and disbelief. Reporters furiously scribbled notes, whispering to one another. The judge's reputation, once untouchable, now teetered on the edge of ruin. Judge Holloway's eyes darted toward the exit. He was trapped. Sarah took a deep breath, steadying herself. "Then tell us, Elijah," she said gently. "What do you know?" The boy clenched his fists, looking the judge straight in the eye. "I saw you meeting with the prosecutor. I heard what you said. You told him you didn't care if Terrence was innocent." The room collectively gasped. Judge Holloway's face went pale. A crack had formed in the foundation of justice, and Elijah was about to break it wide open. For a moment, time seemed to freeze. The courtroom was a tableau of shock. Lawyers exchanged nervous glances, jurors murmured amongst themselves, and reporters furiously typed into their laptops, capturing every second of this unprecedented event. Judge Holloway clenched his jaw, struggling to regain control. "This is an outrage," he bellowed, slamming his gavel down with force. "Bailiff, remove that child at once." The bailiff hesitated, looking to Sarah Whitmore. She stepped forward, her heart pounding. "Your Honor," she said, her voice firm but steady, "if this child's claims are false, we will quickly establish that. But if they're true—" She let her words hang in the air, letting the weight of their implication settle over the courtroom. The judge's face darkened, but before he could argue, Elijah took a deep breath. "I have a recording," he announced. "A real one. I heard everything." A collective gasp filled the room. Judge Holloway visibly stiffened. Sarah's pulse raced. "Elijah, you say you have a recording? How did you get it?" Elijah hesitated for a second, then reached into his pocket. "I was cleaning my mom's office," he said. She used to work at the courthouse before she died." Sarah nodded, encouraging him to continue. "And what did you find?" "I found an old phone," Elijah explained. "It was my mom's. I was playing around with it and saw it still had some recordings saved." Terrence, who had been silent, finally spoke. "And you found something about my case?" Elijah swallowed hard. "Yes. A recording of Judge Holloway talking to the prosecutor. They planned everything." The courtroom erupted into chaos. Reporters shouted questions, people murmured in disbelief, and Sarah turned sharply to face the judge. "Your Honor," she said, voice unwavering, "I think we all need to hear that recording." Judge Holloway's face was ashen. His hands gripped the gavel so tightly his knuckles turned white. The truth was about to come out, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. The courtroom was no longer just a legal battleground. It had transformed into a scene of reckoning. The judge's composure was gone, his hand shaking slightly as he tried to steady his gavel. "Enough of this nonsense," Judge Holloway growled. "This is an attempt to disrupt justice, but the damage was already done." Elijah's words had planted a seed of doubt, and it was spreading rapidly. Sarah turned to the bailiff. "Play the recording," she commanded. The bailiff hesitated, glancing at the judge, but as murmurs grew louder in the courtroom, the pressure was undeniable. The truth had to be heard. Elijah took a deep breath and pulled out the phone. He pressed play. A voice crackled through the speaker. Judge Holloway's voice. "Make sure he gets convicted," the judge's voice said, cold and unmistakable. "I don't care what the evidence says." Gasps echoed through the courtroom. The foundation of Judge Holloway's power was beginning to crumble. Sarah stood, her pulse racing. "Your Honor, this evidence is damning," she said, her voice steady despite the chaos. "We need to question Elijah further." Judge Holloway's face twitched, but he remained silent. He was no longer in control. Elijah took a step forward. "There's more," he said. My mom recorded several conversations. She must have known something was wrong. A journalist from the back of the courtroom stood up. We need to hear all of it, he called out. The bailiff, now visibly uncomfortable, looked to Sarah for direction. She nodded. Play the next one, she said, voice unwavering. Elijah scrolled through the old phone and tapped on another recording. The room fell silent as another voice filled the space. I don't care what it takes, the prosecutor's voice said. We'll make sure he never sees freedom. Sarah exchanged glances with Terrence, whose hands clenched into fists. The evidence was irrefutable. The entire case had been manipulated. Judge Holloway slammed his gavel. This is illegal. That recording was obtained unlawfully. No, Your Honor, Sarah interrupted. This was recorded by someone who worked within the system. Someone who feared the corruption inside these very walls. The reporters scrambled to document every word. The courtroom had become the epicenter of a scandal that would shake the very foundation of the justice system. Judge Holloway's eyes darted around the room. His grip tightened on his gavel, but he knew he was losing. His empire of power and control was slipping away in real time. Elijah's voice cut through the silence once again. My mom, she always said that justice should be fair, he said, his eyes glistening with emotion. She gave me these recordings because she knew something wasn't right. Sarah turned to the judge. Your Honor, with this new evidence, I demand an immediate review of this case. The judge's hands trembled. The walls were closing in. Suddenly, the doors burst open, and two uniformed officers stepped inside. One of them, a high-ranking investigator, strode toward the front of the room. Judge Holloway, the officer announced, holding up an official document. You are under investigation for judicial misconduct and conspiracy to pervert the course of justice. A stunned silence filled the courtroom. Judge Holloway opened his mouth to protest, but no words came. Sarah exhaled, turning toward Terrence. Hope flickered in his eyes for the first time in months. Elijah stepped back, his job done. But this was only the beginning. The gavel, once a symbol of power, lay motionless on the judge's desk. The unraveling had begun. The shock waves of the revelation rippled through the courtroom. The atmosphere, once heavy with formality and control, was now thick with uncertainty and a hint of chaos. Cameras flashed, reporters whispered feverishly into their microphones, and murmurs from the gallery turned into a low roar of disbelief. Judge Holloway remained frozen in place, his mind racing for a way out. His once unshakable authority had crumbled in a matter of minutes, and now he was staring into the eyes of the very system he had manipulated for years. Sarah took a deep breath, steadying herself. This was a moment of reckoning, not just for Holloway, but for everyone who had suffered under his corrupt rulings. She turned to the investigator. What happens next? The officer stepped forward, his voice firm. Judge Holloway, we are placing you on immediate suspension pending further investigation. You will be escorted from this courtroom and placed under house arrest until we complete our inquiry. Gasps rippled through the crowd. It wasn't an immediate conviction, but it was a significant fall from grace. Holloway's lips pressed into a thin line. For the first time in his career, he had no control over the proceedings. You can't do this, he spat, his voice laced with desperation. I am the judge here. No, sir, the investigator corrected. Not anymore. The officers moved in. The gavel, which once symbolized his absolute power, remained untouched on the desk as his hands were placed behind his back. The sound of metal clinking against his wrists sent another wave of murmurs through the room. Elijah watched intently, his small fingers gripping the phone that had changed everything. He felt a strange mix of emotions, relief, fear, and a deep longing for his mother, who should have been here to witness this moment. Terence slowly rose from his seat, his movements cautious as if afraid that at any moment someone would snatch his newfound hope away. "Does this mean my case will be reviewed?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Sarah turned to the investigator, who gave a firm nod. "This entire case will be re-evaluated. The prosecution's conduct is now under scrutiny as well. If what we've heard is true, there is a strong possibility that your conviction will be overturned." Terence exhaled sharply, his eyes glistening with emotion. 6 months of fear, hopelessness, and desperation had led to this moment. He looked at Elijah and gave a small nod. "Thank you," he said, his voice thick with emotion. Elijah shuffled his feet, suddenly overwhelmed by the weight of what he had done. I just wanted the truth to come out." Sarah placed a gentle hand on his shoulder, "And because of you, justice might finally be served." The judge was led away, his head hanging low as the cameras captured every second of his fall from grace. The reporters rushed out, eager to be the first to break the news to the world. Terence turned to Sarah. "So, what happens now?" "We fight," she said. "We push for your case to be dismissed, and we make sure no one like Holloway ever does this again." As the courtroom slowly emptied, Elijah lingered for a moment, staring at the judge's empty seat. The battle wasn't over yet, but for the first time in a long time, justice felt like more than just a word. It felt possible. The aftermath of the courtroom revelation sent shockwaves beyond the courthouse walls. The media swarmed the building, reporters eagerly dissecting every detail of Judge Holloway's arrest. Social media exploded with reactions, debates, and calls for broader investigations into cases the disgraced judge had presided over. Terence sat in a small conference room adjacent to the courtroom, his hands still shaking. Across from him sat Sarah and Elijah, the latter staring down at the phone that had exposed a deep-rooted injustice. The weight of it all still hung heavy in the air. "This isn't over," Sarah said, breaking the silence. "Judge Holloway was just one piece of the puzzle. If he was willing to manipulate a case, we have to assume he wasn't acting alone." Terence nodded slowly. "But what happens to me now? Do I just wait?" Sarah exhaled, tapping her pen against the table. "We file an emergency appeal. With Holloway removed and his credibility shattered, the prosecution's case is crumbling, but there's still resistance." Elijah looked up, his brow furrowed. "From who?" Sarah sighed. "The district attorney's office. Even with this revelation, admitting they played a role in wrongful convictions means exposing an entire chain of misconduct. They won't let that happen without a fight." Terence clenched his jaw. "So they'd rather keep an innocent man behind bars than admit the truth?" "Unfortunately, that's how the system works sometimes," Sarah said. "But we're not going to let them win." A knock on the door interrupted the conversation. A man in a suit entered, his face unreadable. "Miss Whitmore, we need to talk. New developments." Sarah stood, exchanging a glance with Terence before following the man out. Elijah sat back in his chair, fiddling with his phone. "Terence?" "Yeah? You think they'll really let you go?" Terence hesitated, then looked at the boy with something close to a smile. "I don't know, Elijah, but for the first time, I have hope." In the DA's office, Sarah sat across from the assistant district attorney, an older woman with sharp eyes and a measured expression. Between them lay a file thick with case documents and evidence. "We both know this case is over," Sarah stated, her voice unwavering. "Judge Holloway's corruption is undeniable, and your office turned a blind eye for years." The appeal is already being filed. You can either fight it and let this scandal consume your entire department, or you can do the right thing and drop the charges. The ADA leaned back in her chair, considering. Dropping the case so suddenly could set a precedent, she said carefully. We need to review everything. Sarah leaned forward. You don't have that luxury anymore. The public is watching, the media is watching. If you drag this out, you'll be complicit. A long silence followed. Then, finally, the ADA sighed. I'll speak with my superiors, but don't expect a miracle. Sarah stood, her confidence unwavering. I don't need a miracle, I just need justice. As Sarah returned to Terrence, the tension was evident in her face. They're considering it, she said, but we need to be ready for anything. Terrence exhaled, rubbing his temples. I've waited this long. I can wait a little longer. Elijah looked between them. And if they don't let him go? Sarah's eyes darkened. Then we expose everything, every case, every lie, every deal made in the shadows. This fight isn't just for Terrence. It's for everyone who's ever been wronged by this system. Terrence sat up straighter. The battle wasn't over, but for the first time, he wasn't fighting alone. Days passed, and the weight of uncertainty loomed over Terrence like a storm cloud. The media pressure intensified, with major networks broadcasting panel discussions about the systemic corruption in the judicial system. Protesters gathered outside the courthouse, demanding justice not only for Terrence, but for every wrongly convicted person caught in Judge Holloway's web. Signs reading, "Free Terrence Malone," flooded the streets. Sarah spent her days buried in legal documents, scrutinizing every case Holloway had ruled on. Every evening she met with Terrence, giving him updates, offering hope, and strategizing their next steps. Meanwhile, Elijah became an unlikely hero in the public eye. His courage had ignited a movement. One evening, as they sat in Sarah's office, a knock came at the door. It was Detective Marcus Tate, an investigator known for his relentless pursuit of the truth. He stepped inside, dropping a thick folder onto the table. I found something, he said, his voice grim. Something that changes everything. Sarah flipped open the folder, her heart pounding. Inside were transcripts, emails, and handwritten notes. Evidence that the corruption extended far beyond Holloway. Other judges, prosecutors, and even law enforcement officers were implicated. This was bigger than any of them had imagined. Terrence leaned forward. What does this mean for my case? Tate exhaled sharply. It means you were never supposed to have a fair trial. It means someone powerful wanted you locked away. Sarah's mind raced. If we bring this forward, we're not just freeing Terrence, we're exposing an entire network of corruption. Elijah, who had been quiet, finally spoke. Then we have to do it. Tate shook his head. You don't understand. If we go public with this before we're ready, people will get desperate. They will try to silence you. Sarah's jaw tightened. Then we move carefully, but we don't stop. That night, Sarah received an anonymous message on her phone. Drop the case. Walk away, before it's too late. Her stomach twisted. She knew this fight wouldn't be easy, but now it was clear. Someone was willing to go to extreme lengths to keep their secrets buried. She showed the message to Terrence the next morning. His expression darkened. They're scared. Sarah nodded. And scared people do reckless things. A loud knock on the door interrupted their conversation. It was one of Sarah's assistants, breathless and panicked. We have a problem. She held up a newspaper. The headline read, Witness in Malone case under investigation for perjury. Below it, Elijah's face stared back at them. Terrence shot to his feet. They're trying to discredit him. Sarah grabbed her phone and started dialing. This is how they operate. They don't fight fair. But they made a mistake, because now we fight back. Meanwhile, Elijah sat at home, his hand shaking as he scrolled through social media. People were questioning his credibility, spreading rumors, twisting the truth. His moment of courage was being turned against him. His grandmother entered the room, placing a gentle hand on his shoulder. "Don't let them break you, Elijah. You did the right thing." He looked up at her, determination flickering in his eyes. "I won't let them win." He picked up his phone and started typing. Within minutes, he posted a video addressing the public directly. "They're trying to silence me. They want you to believe that I lied. But I know the truth, and I won't back down." The video went viral in hours. People rallied behind Elijah, supporting him, defending him. The tide was turning again. As Sarah watched the video from her office, she smiled. They underestimated us. But she knew the fight was far from over. If they wanted justice, they had to be ready for whatever came next. The morning after Elijah's video went viral, the courthouse was in turmoil. Protesters had doubled in numbers, their chants echoing through the city streets. News cameras lined the sidewalks, eager to capture the moment justice was either served or buried beneath corruption. The entire nation was watching. Sarah arrived at the courthouse early, greeted by a flood of reporters shouting questions. She ignored them, her focus set on the hearing that would decide Terrence's fate. Inside the courtroom, tension ran high. The district attorney's team sat stiffly, their expressions unreadable. The judge, this time a fair and respected official, entered, bringing the room to order. "We are here to review the case of Terrence Malone in light of new evidence," the judge announced. "Ms. Whitmore, you may proceed." Sarah rose, her voice steady yet filled with urgency. "Your Honor, we have presented undeniable proof that Judge Holloway manipulated this trial. The prosecution's case was built on lies, coercion, and corruption. The defense demands an immediate dismissal of all charges." The DA stood, his face tight. "While we acknowledge Judge Holloway's misconduct, we maintain that the case against Mr. Malone still has merit." A murmur swept through the courtroom. Sarah anticipated this resistance. "Then let's allow the truth to be heard," she said. "I call Elijah Carter to the stand." Elijah walked forward, his small frame standing tall as he took his oath. He gripped the microphone and cleared his throat. "I heard Judge Holloway tell the prosecutor that Terrence didn't matter, that they had to make an example out of him no matter what." Gasps erupted in the room. The judge banged his gavel. "Order." Sarah nodded at Elijah. "And do you have proof?" Elijah reached into his pocket, pulling out a flash drive. "This has all the recordings my mom saved before she passed away. It proves everything." The bailiff took the flash drive, inserting it into the court system. The room fell silent as the audio played. Judge Holloway's voice, clear and undeniable, ordering the wrongful conviction of an innocent man. The DA's face paled. He knew this was the end. "Your Honor," he said through clenched teeth, "the state withdraws its case." Sarah exhaled sharply as murmurs of relief swept through the courtroom. The judge turned to Terrence. "Mr. Malone, you are hereby exonerated. You are free to go." Tears welled in Terrence's eyes as he turned to Sarah, then to Elijah. He was free. Outside, the crowd erupted in cheers. As Terrence stepped out, he was engulfed by supporters chanting his name. Sarah stood beside him, smiling as Elijah took it all in, his journey from witness to warrior now cemented in history. "We did it," Elijah whispered. Sarah placed a hand on his shoulder. "You changed the world today." Terrence turned to the cameras, his voice strong. "This isn't just my story. There are countless others who still need justice, and we won't stop until they get it." If this story moved you, don't let it end here. Share it, speak up, and stand for justice. Subscribe to our channel, like this video, and turn on notifications. Together, we can fight for truth.